Yes. But how do you stop their claw? Claw? You say claw?
If someone go to claw,
yes,
you knock
Joo
away.
Claw.
You just knock away. Knock away.
So if the Jew come with a claw,
you knock away.
With a claw,
knock away.
Claw.
Knock away.
They can do two hands.
And you can do two hands.
It's very good.
Yeah. Or you can knock away this way. Either way, it doesn't matter.
And if the Jew come?
You knock away.
And the Jew come?
And you knock away.
The Jew come with a claw. With a claw. With a claw.
Mr. Silverstein, thank you for giving us the time this morning to walk and give us a tour of your complex.
Okay, delighted to do it.
Where are we now, and where do we stand with the complex?
Okay, Tower 1 is a finished building, tallest building in the Western Hemisphere, and occupied. Tower 4, you'll see to the south of Tower 1, that's a finished building. Then Tower 3, which is just to the north of Tower 4, is under construction. And then Tower 2, we had a tenant for it until 2 weeks ago.
Yes, we're going to talk about that a little bit.
The Murdoch interest canceled that one, decided not to go ahead with the deal. But we'll find a substitute for the Murdoch interest for that building, and that building will get built. And when it does, that will be taller than, it's just to the north of Tower 3 and 4, but it will be taller than 3 and 4, respectively. It would actually be the second tallest building down here. Again, number 1 being the tallest. Right, so all of that's happening, and therefore I'd say at this juncture about 75% finished with rebuilding the Trade Center.
75% completion.
About that, yeah. And we'll finish in 2020, 2021, in that period. So about 20 years should get us to completion. So as you can see here, we're on the 10th floor of 7 World Trade Center. And believe it or not, this is exactly where all these buildings were designed to begin with, right? And so back in 2001, when we were trying to decide what we're going to do here and how, we finally came up with a plan, and that plan began to take shape. And by 2003, we had architects working in here. It was a beehive of activity, right? And it was also a beehive of activity until 2 weeks ago, all Inspector Tower 2, because everything was redesigned right here.
Wow.
Right? So it'll staff up again. It'll come up again.
Yeah.
But the activity was frenetic. Now, with respect to Tower 2, this is the Bjarke design, the successor to the Norman Foster design, and you can see the stepped building, typical of his work, and very different and very, very contemporary. Right? Young architect, 41 years of age, but brilliant in his concepts and his design work. It's quite exciting. The building is clearly contemporary, and it reflects the language of tomorrow.
Excellent.
Right, which is really quite special. So when you're 85 years of age and you look at this stuff, you say, this is pretty good. It's really unique. And working with him has been an absolute pleasure. This is Richard Rogers, who's responsible for world-class architecture around the globe. And he designed Tower 3 for us. And Tower 3 is totally different from Tower 2. Its lines are much more conceptual, much more predictable. And his building reflects structural members as being part of the facade of the structure. So it's very different, typical of Richard Rogers' designs, very masculine, very formidable, and significant. But the building is pretty formidable. It's got about 2.6 million feet of space, and it's 80-odd stories in height, so it's a big building.
Yeah.
And that's Mr. Rogers. And then, of course, we come to Mr. Maki, Fumihiko Maki, a Japanese architect, who's known for beautiful buildings in his right, but in his language, and his language is minimalist. Right? Okay. So it's really quite lovely, I think quite spectacular. And if you look carefully at the designs of Tower 4, you'll see the building is extremely simple, right? devoid of flamboyance of any kind,
Yeah.
very minimalist in its approach. But when you see the building itself and you go to it, you realize the beauty that's inherent in that design. It's spectacular. Yeah. But you have to look closely for the details. When you look at it, you really look at it closely and understand what you're looking at, you come to an appreciation of that detail work. It's spectacular, I think. And of course, here you have the Calatrava designed path terminal, which is a unique structure. It's one of the really beautiful buildings, probably among the most beautiful buildings in America. But as a terminal, as a transportation terminal,
right.
It's spectacular. It should be enormously costly, but exquisitely done, exquisitely designed. The materials are beautiful, all white marble. So it'll be a spectacular edifice with several 100,000 square feet of retail in the base of the building. And everything is connected below grade to the path terminal, right? So you'll be able to walk below grade in style with white marble surrounding you as you go from building to building or location to location. But you'll be able to go all the way from the east side of Manhattan underground to the path terminal and to all the buildings here at the Trade Center. And you'll be able to go all the way through underground to Brookfield Center and the shops that are there, in addition to the 500,000 square feet of Westfield retail shops that is at the base of all these buildings. So at the end of the day, it'll be a 24/7 community.
You remain to have a vision and clarity and the foresight to be able to create and get the project done and be able to still go ahead and create something beautiful and show the rest of the world we're going to have that balance between the appreciation of the historic site, but still tell the rest of the world and the rest of the country we're New York and we're rebuilding. How did you do that?
I'm not quite sure myself. But in fairness, it became obvious to me very early on after 9/11. I said to myself, well, we can't leave it like this. The most important thing for us to do is get back and rebuild it as quickly as we possibly can. And so we did. It went out of my mind, but our architects tell me that 2 weeks after 9/11, I called them and I said, come on in. Let's get busy. We have to start working on a new building for 7 World Trade Center. Right. And there were many other voices. So you remember Mayor Giuliani, God bless him at that time, said the site should forever stay green. And so I said, after a while, I finally said, I took up the courage and I said to them one day, I said, but as New Yorkers, you have to do what's good for New York, right? And so it became a fascination, but also a realization on my part that through that all, I just had to keep moving the ball down the court to get this done. And we did.
וררגע מה שקורה פה, הנה בא עם רצים, כל הרצים, הנה בא יהודה, זה יהודה גדול הערב, הם זורקים את הכסף, רגע הוא בא, היא כמעט לקחה את הכסף, היהודה עולה, רגע הנה בא, קיבל את יהודה, רגע הבחורים מאוד, הם זורקים את הכסף עליה, רגע, מה קורה פה? עכשיו, זה ביצה.
In February 1993, it was already passing its prime as office space, overtaken by a generation of more recent, cybernetically smart buildings with higher ceilings and greater built-in electrical capacity. To maintain the Trade Center as Class A office space commanding top rents, the Port Authority would have had to spend $800 million rebuilding its electrical, electronic communications, and cooling systems. Furthermore, after the 1993 bombing, the tenancy had dropped dramatically, and it had been very hard to bring it back to normal levels. But the biggest problem with the Twin Towers was the large amount of asbestos they contained. Built in a time when the use of asbestos was still allowed in civil construction, at least 400 tons of this extremely dangerous material had been used to fireproof the steel structure of the buildings and to insulate hundreds of miles of pipings for water, heating, and air conditioning. Asbestos was also present in the ceiling panels, the elevator shafts, and the vinyl tiles from office floors. From a property condition assessment of the Twin Towers dated December 2000, we read, according to Port Authority records, a total of 7 million square feet of vinyl asbestos floor tiles were installed in the World Trade Center. By the time asbestos was banned from civil construction, the Twin Towers were nearing their completion. Initially, the asbestos was encapsulated wherever possible to prevent the particles from being inhaled. But in the 1990s, the regulations grew tighter, and every time a simple renovation was needed, the complete removal and replacement of the asbestos was also required. At the same time, because of the health risk it posed, the cost of asbestos removal and abatement had been skyrocketing. Safety procedures required the areas to be treated to be vacated in advance, hermetically sealed, and kept under negative pressure at all times to prevent particles from escaping outside. Only specialized workers could access the area, wearing airtight suits and respirators. A full decontamination process was required every time they left the area. In the mid-90s, the Port Authority put out different bids for the removal and replacement of the asbestos in a case-by-case scenario. For example, this is a 1995 contract for the installation of 2 low-voltage substations in Towers 1 and 2. One section in the contract listed the replacement of asbestos at floors 41, 42, 75, and 76 in Tower 1 and floors 75 and 76 in Tower 2. Total cost for the asbestos removal and replacement, $868,000. Tower 2, 40th floor, contract for asbestos removal and abatement, total cost, $650,000. Towers 1 and 2, removal of asbestos and new ceilings at floors 7, 41, and 75. Total cost, $882,000. It soon became clear that the Twin Towers were quickly turning from a prestigious asset into a serious liability. From the December 2000 condition assessment, we read, from 1986 to 1999, a total 31 contracts were bid, and a total of $58.2 million was spent in abatement projects. By then, 3.5 million square feet of vinyl asbestos floor tile was removed. Only half of the initial 7 million square feet installed. At the estimated cost of $5 to $6 per square foot, that accounted for an additional $20 million in cost for the Port Authority, and that was for the floor tiles only. There were also hundreds of thousands of square feet of spray-on fireproofing to be removed throughout both buildings. And then there were the elevators. This is the list of elevator shafts with asbestos-containing material as of December 2000. This is Tower 1, and this is Tower 2. Reportedly, by the year 2000, the Port Authority was looking at an asbestos abatement bill of as much as $1 billion, the same money it would have cost to build a brand new tower. Back in the 90s, the Port Authority had sued the insurance companies, trying to get them to cover the cost of the asbestos removal. But in May 2001, 4 months before the terrorist attack, the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey lost their 10-year-old court battle. At that point, the Port Authority was between a rock and a hard place. The Twin Towers could no longer be maintained without incurring the cost of asbestos removal, yet they could not be demolished because of the large amounts of asbestos they contained. The only remaining option was to dismantle and remove the 2 poison-filled giants one piece at a time. But the cost of such an operation would have been so astronomical that no one has ever tried to put a number on it. Luckily for all, the stalemate was broken when a real estate tycoon named Larry Silverstein, who already owned Building 7, offered to purchase a 99-year lease for the Twin Towers.
76 years old, and look at him go. He walks fast, talks fast, and is always selling.
Silverstein seemed in a big hurry to close the deal. Even though he had been hospitalized for a car accident during the bidding operations, he asked his doctors to take him off the morphine so the deal could be finalized.
So I told the doctor, I said, kill the morphine, and I got to get my people in here, because you can't think with morphine. So they let the morphine run down. The pain was terrible, but I brought everybody together, and that's when we framed our best and final bid.
On July 24, 2001, Larry Silverstein celebrated the acquisition of the Twin Towers with a public ceremony.
Silverstein signed the lease on the World Trade Center just 6 weeks before 9/11.
He then took out an insurance policy covering the Twin Towers for $3.2 billion in case of total destruction. Silverstein then began spending every morning of the week in his new office in the North Tower.
And so my mornings were spent at the Trade Center, and then by noon I was back uptown.
But on September 11, luckily for him, Silverstein didn't go to work. Even though he had already scheduled a business meeting in the North Tower, he found out that his wife had made an appointment for him at the dermatologist.
The morning of September 11th, Silverstein was scheduled to have breakfast at the restaurant at the top of the North Tower. He canceled at the last minute at the insistence of his wife, Clara, who wanted him to go see his dermatologist.
That particular morning, my wife, God bless her, had made an appointment for me at the doctor. And I said, okay, yes, dear, I'll go.
Everyone who was in that restaurant that morning perished.
And then, just minutes later, received a telephone call to turn on a television set and witnessed this horrendous circumstance.
This is how, on the evening of September 11, Larry Silverstein found himself in control of some 12 million square feet of new office space to be built on some of the most valuable real estate in the world. And since the terrorist attacks had been two separate events, contended Silverstein, the insurance companies would have to pay him $7 billion to rebuild what he has always been calling My Three Towers.
I will spend $7 billion on My Three Towers.
Eventually, a settlement was reached for $4.5 billion, which was still one-third more than the amount initially insured by Silverstein. And since on September 11, due to the terrorist attacks, Building 7 had also been destroyed, Silverstein received another $800 million to rebuild a skyscraper that had originally cost $400 million.
It's a much more beautiful building. It's a glass facade, allows the light to come into the space. The views on four sides are phenomenal, and the space looks magnificent.
In the meantime, all the asbestos from the Twin Towers has been inhaled by the citizens of downtown Manhattan, and especially by the first responders and volunteers who worked at Ground Zero, who are now being decimated by mesothelioma and other pulmonary diseases.